Good morning and welcome to our remembrance service. We continue with the poem In Flanders Fields, which will be read by Philip Cotton.
John McCrae was a military surgeon serving in the Canadian Army at the time of the First World War. His well-known poem, In Flanders Fields, memorializes the April 1915 battle in Belgium's Ypres salient. For 17 days, McCrae tended those injured in the battle. The poem, written after the death of a close friend, was published in Punch magazine and led to the adoption of the poppy as the flower of remembrance for the British and Commonwealth war dead. In 1915, McCrae was transferred to Boulogne, No. 3 General Hospital, to oversee medicine. He worked there until his pneumonia-related death on January 28, 1918, at the age of 45. McCrae was buried with full military honours in Wimereux Cemetery near Boulogne, France. In Flanders Fields by John McCrae. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
Thank you, Philip. And we start our Shabbat morning service on page 112, Shabbat morning service number 2, which will be led by Mary.
Matovu, Matovu, Oleha Yaakov, Mishkanoteha Yisrael, Mishkanoteha Yisrael, Vani Beroch Hasteha, Avo Beteha, Eshtachave, Eshtachave, El Heichol Kodsheha, Be'yirateha, El Heichol Kodsheha, Be'yirateha, Adonai Ahavti Meon Beteha, Umekom Mishkan Kevodeha, Bani Eshtachave Bekra Evraha Lifnei Adonai Osi, Bani Tefilati Laha Adonai Et Ratzon Elohim Elohim Berov Chasdeha Haneni Bemet Yisheha. Eternal God, a mystery surrounds my life. What came before it and what lies beyond it are shrouded in darkness. But in the darkness is your presence, and in the mystery your love. No mind can grasp the splendor of your being, no tongue express the majesty of your works. Yet there are times when we sense a reality that is beyond our mortal sight. May this Sabbath be such a time for us. Help us to hear your voice, to find your image in our souls, and to be at peace. My God, the soul you have given me is pure, for you have created and formed it and breathed it into me, and you sustain it within me. So long as there is a soul within me, I will give thanks to you, Eternal One, my God and God of my ancestors, Sovereign of all worlds, Guide of every human soul.
We praise you, O God, in whose hands are the souls of all the living and the spirits of all flesh.
Baruch she'amah b'hayah ha'olam baruch hu, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, hamhulal b'fi amo, meshubach umfoa belishon hasidav avadav, bishbachot uvizmirot negadalecha v'nimlicha, malkeinu yahid hei ha'olamim.
Baruch atah Adonai, melech mechulal batishbachot.
To you the stars of morning sing, from you their radiance bright did spring, and steadfast in their vigils day and night, your angels flooded with fervor ring your praise. They teach the holy ones to bring into your house the breath of early light. The heavens declare the glory of God.
The sky proclaims God's handiwork.
Day unto day utters speech.
Night unto night teaches knowledge.
Yet there is no speech, there are no words.
Not a sound of them is heard.
And still their call goes out to all the earth.
And their message to the end of the world.
God's teaching is perfect.
Reviving the soul.
God's word is unfailing.
Making wise the simple.
God's precepts are right.
Enlightening the mind.
God's commandments are clear.
Enlightening the eye.
God's doctrine is pure.
Enduring forever.
God's guidance is true.
And altogether just.
They are more to be desired than gold, than any amount of fine gold.
Sweeter than honey from the honeycomb.
Your servant pays heed to them.
On keeping them much depends.
Who is aware of errors?
Cleanse me therefore of unconscious sins.
Hold back your servant also from willful sins.
Let them control them.
Then I shall be blameless.
And innocent of grave transgression.
May the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. I make music and compose sweet songs, since it is for you my spirit longs. My soul seeks the shelter of your hand, all your mysteries to understand. As I praise your glorious name above, my heart craves, Eternal One, your love. Graciously accept, O God, my praise, since for you my spirit longs always. Yishtabach shimha la'ad malkeinu, ha'el hamelech hagadol v'hakadosh b'shamayim uva'aretz, ki lacha na'eh Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu, shir ushpacha halel v'zimra, v'rahot v'hodaot, me'ata v'ad olam. Baruch atah Adonai haboher b'shirei zimra. Please turn to page 135. Baruch et Adonai hamavorach. Baruch Adonai hamavorach leolam vaed. Praise the one to whom our praise is due. We praise the Eternal One to whom our praise is due forever. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzeh o uvarei hoshek, oseh shalom uvarei et hakol, hameir la'aretz v'ladarim aleha v'rachamim, uvtuvo mahadesh bechol yom tamid ma'aseh vereshit, ma'rabu ma'aseha Adonai, kulam b'hakma asita, mala'ah ha'aretz kinyaneha, titbarak Adonai Eloheinu, al shabach ma'aseh yadeha va'al ma'orei or she'asita, yafa arucha selah. Baruch atah Adonai yotzeh hamarot. Great is your love for us, eternal God, and abundant your compassion. Our ancestors trusted in you, and you taught them the laws of life. So be gracious to us and teach us. Incline our hearts to hear your words, to know and understand, to learn and teach, and with love to uphold the truths of your Torah. Enlighten us with your teaching. Make us faithful to your commandments and wholehearted in the love and awe of your name. For in love you summon us to serve you and proclaim your unity. Baruch atah Adonai, haboher be'amo Yisrael ba'ahava. And if you wish, please stand for the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Eternal One is our God, the Eternal God is one. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Ba'ed. Praise forever be God's glorious majesty. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha uv'chol nefashcha uv'chol me'odecha. V'hayu hadavarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al lavavecha. V'shinantam lavanecha v'dibarta bam v'shiftecha v'vetecha uv'lektecha v'derek uv'shakpacha uv'kumecha uv'kshatam leot al yadeha v'hayu letotafot ben enecha. Uktavtam al mezuzot betecha uvish'arecha. Leman tizkeru asitem et kol mitzvotai item kedoshim lelohehem ani Adonai Elohehem asher hotzeiti etchem meretz Mitzrayim Liot lahem lelohim ani Adonai Elohehem. Let's read the following passage together. Good and beautiful and true, sound, established, and enduring are these words now and forever. True it is, Eternal One, that you are our sovereign God and Redeemer, as you were the God and Redeemer of our ancestors. You are our Maker, the rock of our salvation. We have known you always as our helper and our liberator. There is no God but you. Truly, you are first and you are last. We have no Redeemer but you. You redeemed us from Egypt and freed us from the house of bondage. Then with great joy, Moses, Miriam, and all Israel together sang to you this song. Mi hamoha b'elim Adonai, mi kamoha nedav b'kodesh, nora tehilot osefele. A new song the redeemed sang to your name at the shore of the sea. With one accord they gave thanks and proclaimed your sovereignty. Adonai imlok leolam ba'ed, Zur Yisrael, Kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, Go aleinu Adonai, Zebaot Shemo, Kadosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai, Kol Yisrael, Kol Yisrael, Yisrael.
Yisher Koach, Mary. Thank you very much. And we continue now with the poem by Zygmunt Sassoon called Dreamers.
Sigrid Sassoon is best remembered for his angry and compassionate poems about World War I, which brought him public and critical acclaim. Avoiding the sentimentality and jingoism of many war poets, Sassoon wrote of the horror and brutality of trench warfare and contemptuously satirized generals, politicians, and churchmen for their incompetence and blind support of the war. Dreamers by Sigrid Sassoon. Soldiers are citizens of death's grey land, drawing no dividend from time's tomorrows. In the great hour of destiny they stand, each with his feuds and jealousies and sorrows. Soldiers are sworn to action. They must win some flaming, fatal climax with their lives. Soldiers are dreamers. When the guns begin, They think of firelit homes, clean beds, and wives. I see them in dugouts, gnawed by rats, and in the ruined trenches lashed with rain, dreaming of things they did with balls and bats, and mocked by hopeless longing to regain bank holidays and picture shows and spats, and going to the office in the train.
And now the Amida, please stand if you wish to. Adonai sefotai tiftachu fi agitei latecha. Adonai sefotai tiftachu fi agitei latecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elokei avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, ve'Elohei Yaakov. Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Nora, El Elyon. Gomel, Hasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol. Zocher, Hasteovot, Michot. Mavi Gula, Livnei V'Neihem, Lema'an Shema Be'ahava. Melech Ozeu, Mashiach Magain. Baruch atah Adonai, Magain Avraham, V'Ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Li'olam Adonai, Machei Meitim Ato Rav Lahoshia. Mashiv HaRuach U'Marid HaGeshem, Mazriach HaShemesh U'Marid HaTal. Machakel Chayim B'Chesed, Machei Meitim B'Rachamim Rabim. Salmei Knalflim V'Rofalei Homlim, Matir Asurim, M'Kayem Emunato L'Shenei Ofor. Mi Chamalcha Ba'al Gevurot U'mi Domelach, Melech Meimit Umchaye Matzmiach Yeshua. V'ne'emon atah L'Rehaut Meitim, Baruch atah Adonai Machaye HaMeitim. Makadesh et Shimcha Ba'olam, Kashem Shemakdishim Oto Bishmei Morom Kakatav Al Yad Neviecha. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot Malei Chol Haaretz Kavodo. Kavodo Malei Olam, Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkomo. Mimkomo Malkeinu, Tofia V'Timloch Aleinu, Ki Machakim Anachnu Lach. Yimloch Adonai Leolam, Elohai Yiftion, Ladavador, Hallelujah. Ladavador. Dole dova dole dova do nagid gad lecho. Le dova do nagid gad lecho. Ula netza netzachim kedushacht chonakdish kedushacht chonakdish. V'shivecho Eloheinu mipinu lo yomush. Leolam, leolam va'ed. Ledovado, ledovado, ledovado nagid gad lecho. Ledovado, ledovado, ledovado nagid gad lecho. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el ha'kadosh. Just adjust my screen a little. You inspired our ancestors to hallow this day for your service. When upon its coming we pause to contemplate our life, we learn anew that we do not live by bread alone, but also by the spiritual nourishment we receive when we open ourselves to your influence. We thank you for the Sabbath day and for the opportunity it offers to enhance the quality of our lives. We thank you for its joy and for its peace. May our worship help us to take into our hearts its message of holiness and consecrate all our days by devotion to what is true, beautiful, and good. Yismechu b'malchutecha, Yismechu b'malchutecha, Shomrei Shabbat v'koei oneg, Am kadshei shavi, Am kadshei shavi, Kulam yisba'u v'yitangu mituvecho, V'hashvi v'tzitabo v'kidashto, V'hashvi v'tzitabo v'kidashto, Hemdat yamim Oto karata zeche lemase v'reishit. Our God and God of our ancestors, may our rest on this day be pleasing in your sight. Sanctify us by your commandments and make us loyal to your teaching. Satisfy us with your goodness, gladden us with your salvation, and purify our hearts to serve you in truth. In your gracious love, Eternal One, let the holiness of your Sabbath enter our hearts, and may all Israel who hallow your name be exalted by its peace. We praise you, O God, for the holiness of the Sabbath. Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu ba'amcha Yisrael, u'tefilotam b'chava tekabel, u'tehi l'ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otecho levadecho b'yirah na'avod. Modim anachnu lach, she'ato hu Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elahei avotenu le'alam va'ed. Tzor chayenu, magen ishenu, ator hu l'dor v'ador. Nodeh lecho nsapeh tehilatecha, al chayenu hamsarim biyadecha, v'al nishmotenu habudot lach, v'al nisecho sheb kol yam imanu, v'al niflotecho v'tovatecho, sheb kol eit erev v'valke v'zacharayim. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcho u'lecho na'eh lehadot. Grant peace, welfare, and blessing, grace, love, and mercy to us and to all Israel, your people. As a loving parent, bless us with the light of your presence, and for by the light of your presence, eternal God, you have revealed to us the law of life, a love of kindness and righteousness, blessing and mercy, life and peace. For it is good in your sight that your people Israel and all peoples be blessed at all times with your gift of peace. We praise you, O God, the source of peace. And now Jess Clark, I think, has a reading for us.
Indeed.
Jessie, over to you.
Wilfred Owen, who wrote some of the best British poetry on World War I, composed nearly all of his poems in slightly over a year, from August 1917 to September 1918. In November of that year, he was killed in action at the age of 25, 1 week before the armistice. One of his best-known poems, written after he'd experienced a German gas attack in January 1916, is Dulce et decorum est, which Latin tag he took from Horace, the leading Roman lyric poet during the time of Augustus in the 1st century BCE. The full quote means, "It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country." Dulce et decorum est, a poem by Wilfred Owen. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or lime, dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear every jolt, the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud, of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori.
Thank you, Jessie. Now we have a moment or two of silent prayer, and perhaps you might like to think of family, relatives who perhaps fought or in either war, or perhaps friends who you know who fought and who have been lost in recent wars. A moment or two then of silent prayer. And if I can ask you to turn to the top of page 146, and perhaps just read to yourselves that first paragraph at the top of the page there, starting, "Oh my God." May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O God, my rock and my redeemer. O say shalom bimramav, uyaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol bnei Adam. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'meru. Amen.
Peter and Maggie, and I would like to finish Amidah with the words of the prayer Oseh Shalom. We can't stop wars, but we can work hard for peace. May the Most High, source of perfect peace, grant peace to us, to all Israel, and to all the world. And let us say, Amen. We continue now with the Torah service on page 481, 481. Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai ve'ein kamasecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim umemshaltecha bechol dar v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imloch la'olam va'ed. Adonai oz lamo yiten. Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo, גדלו לאדוני ציון, ונרום שמו יגדל. לך אדוני הגדולה והגבורה, והתפארת והנצח וההוד, ככל בשמיים ובארץ. לך אדוני הממלכה, והמתנשא לכל לראש. This week's Torah portion is Vayera, and I will be reading from chapter 18, verses 22, and then finishing in the verses 32. You will be pleased to know it's going to be today shortcut Torah reading through a beautiful story of our forefather Abraham bargaining with God. This is the first time in the Torah when a human being stands up for other people and argues with God and asks God to save good people, and telling God that good people should not die along the wicked. And that's the whole big question of theodicy. Did we create evil, or has evil been created by God? What I would like to address today in my hopefully shortest drosha, is the special topic of the remembrance, the Shabbat of Remembrance. I asked a few families at the Cheder to reflect their thoughts on the theme. What young people think today about the Remembrance Shabbat. Is it important for us to remember? Is it important for us to stand up to evil? Is it important for us to stand up to destruction? And I would read to you the quotes from the Barkas family. They said to me that my question about Remembrance Sunday is very simple, but a very interesting one, and has sparked some interesting responses around their supper table. Leah feels very strongly that we definitely should remember those people who gave up their lives and the lives of their families and friends 80 years ago. She thinks that we wouldn't be living as good a quality of life, and we may not have lived in a free country if they hadn't fought for our country. Therefore, we should remember them for the good quality of life they have given us. Darren and Charlie both feel it is important to remember the events of the First and Second World War because of its relevance for today, each for different reasons. Charlie made a clear point that the words and actions of Donald Trump over the past 4 years show indicators that he would seek to replace the democracy with a fascist dictatorship. And therefore, we must remember how dangerous this is and where it can lead. Fascism doesn't arrive in black shirts, Charlie says. It arrives in plain clothes. For Darren, the father of the family, he says that during a crisis, people make sacrifices. And this is never more true than during this pandemic. It is important to remember, Darren says, to give us hope, perspective, and inspiration for future crises in times of despair. For me, says Gemma, the mother of the house, I feel a link to the Second World War because of my grandfather, Reuben Lippmann, whom I knew and who taught me and my siblings, meaning Louise and Nick, to play a pretty decent, mean game of backgammon. Amongst other things, Gemma remarked, not least our first drink of whiskey, aged about 11. So Grandpa Reuben was in the army and went to Malta, and we still have his metal trunk, says Gemma. Family members put a positive spin on how her dad, Gemma's dad, David Lippmann, was raised by women until the men returned in 1949. But it must have been very sad to see his father for the first time on a station platform, age 7. Gemma feels very lucky to have had the childhood she had and continue to enjoy the freedom which she and so many other people, so that her grandfather and so many other people fought and died for. Remembrance Day is just that, Gemma says, a reminder of all this and more, to prevent us from taking it for granted in case we forget. I know others feel there will come a time when we no longer need to acknowledge this, says Gemma. There have been other wars since, and will be more to come. I was really touched by Gemma, Darren, Charlie, and Leah's thoughts on the Remembrance Sunday, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I found them really meaningful, and the last sentence written by Gemma particularly poignant. We know and assume and anticipate more wars to come, but why? It is because we know that some humans, particularly those in a position of power, have greed, and they're also disconnected from the world of reality, and they're not able to empathize with human pain, loss, and suffering. It is also because they do not attend Parashat HaShavua classes in synagogues all over the world, because they would have learned then one of the most valuable lessons from God. And the lesson is destruction does not bring change. God, the Eternal One, had to learn this the hard way. After first destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, and then almost the whole entire world in the Great Flood, everyone but Noah's family and all the animals survived. God made the rainbow's pact straight after that with the humans, because the Eternal One realized that killing humans does not change their nature. Since we gained the access to that forbidden fruit of knowing good and bad, we now, each of us, have to fight the battle of choosing to be good or choosing to do the right thing, or choosing to live by moral precepts, and sometimes on a daily basis we should do that, because one never knows when the next test will come. Evolution of our character and our small victories over our moral conduct, that's what will lead to the progress of humanity. We remember those 100,000 millions of fallen in our remembrance service and Remembrance Day commemorations all over the country, because we have to learn the lesson. And the lesson is that the destruction only breeds destruction. It is a lesson for us to remember to have courage and chutzpah, like our forefather Abraham in our parasha had when he stood up for the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he said that we can't destroy, because by destroying one life, we destroy the whole world. We should work for peace, and we should never take peace for granted. We can't stop wars, but we can work for peace, and we should never take peace for granted. I will be reading from chapter 18, verses 22 to 32. I will skip a little bit in the middle. The story, a wonderful story of Abraham pleading God for the people of Sodom, on behalf of people of Sodom. And I will call Philip Cotton up to the Torah today on behalf of all the servicemen and women in our community. Ya'amod Israel ben Avram v'Sarah lekriyat haTorah.
Bachu et Adonai Hamavorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamevorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamavorach leolam vahed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech ha'olam asher bacha banu mikol ha'anamim v'nitan lanu et Baruch Ata Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Philip. ויפנו משם האנשים, וילכו סדומה, ואברהם עודנו עומד לפני אדוני. ויגש אברהם ויאמר, האף תספה צדיק עם רשע? אולי יש 50 צדיקים בתוך העיר. האף תספה ולא תיסע למקום למען 50 הצדיקים אשר בקרבה. חלילה לך מעשות כדבר הזה, להמית צדיק עם רשע, והיה כצדיק כרשע, חלילה לך. השופט כל הארץ לא יעשה משפט? ויאמר אדוני, אם אמצא בסדום 50 צדיקים בתוך העיר, ונסעתי לכל המקום בעבורם. And those peoples, the angels, they turned away and they went towards the city of Sodom. And Abraham remained standing in front of God, of the Eternal One. And he came forward, Abraham, and he said, would you sweep away the righteous one and together with the wicked ones? Maybe there are 50 innocent people in the city. Would you sweep away and will not spare the whole place because of those 50 innocent people which are in the midst of that city? Far be it from you from doing such a thing and killing innocent people together with the wicked, that the innocent people suffer as much as the wicked people. Far it be from you. Should not the judge of the whole earth do justly? And God said, if I find in Sodom, in the city of Sodom, 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. And then they argue. Abraham is asking then for 45, then for 40, then for 30, then for 20. And now we're going to the end of this parasha, verse 30, 31, I think. Vayomer, al naichar ladonai va'adabra, aha pa'am, ulai yimatzun sham asara. Vayomer, lo ashchit ba'avur ha'asara. וילך אדוני כאשר קילה לדבר אל אברהם, ואברהם שב למקומו. And the end of this conversation, when Abraham is asking God not to be angry with him, Al naichar ladonai, do not be angry with me, but let me speak one last time. Va'adabra aha pa'am, maybe you will find there 10 innocent people. And God replied, if I find 10 innocent people in the city, I will not destroy it. And God went when he finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher natan lanu Torat emet vechaye olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Thank you very much. I know it's always worrying saying the Torah blessings, but you did really, really well. Thank you very much. And today, because of our special remembrance service, we're going to have a themed Haftorah. Instead of the Haftorah reading linked to our parasha, we will have a poem. We'll have a poem called For the Fallen, read by Arthur.
for the Fallen by Lawrence Binion. With proud thanksgiving, a mother for her children, England mourns for her dead across the sea. Flesh of her flesh they were, spirit of her spirit, fallen in the cause of the free. Solemn the drums thrill, death august and voil, sing sorrow up into immortal spheres. There is music in the midst of desolation, and a glory that shines upon our tears. We went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. They mingle not with their laughing comrades again. They sit no more at familiar tables of home. They have no lot in our labour of the daytime. They sleep beyond England's foam. But where our desires are and our hopes profound, felt as a wellspring that is hidden from sight, to the innermost heart of their own land, they are known as the stars are known to the night, as the stars that should be bright when we are dust, moving in marches upon the heavenly plain, as the stars that are starry in the time of our darkness. To the end they remain.
Thank you, Arta. We will remember them. And now's the time to put the Torah scroll back in the ark. And we will finish together on page 489. 489. Es chaim hi lamachzikim ba v'tomechea me'oshar derechea darchei noam v'chol netivotea Shalom, Ashivenu Adonai Elecha, V'nashuva, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. We continue now with the story with the talk, which will be given by Norman Rundle. Norman, please.
Good Shabbos, everyone. Nod if you can hear me. Good, excellent. Okay, on the occasion of this Remembrance Shabbat, Rabbi Tanya suggested that I shared with you some examples of my family's lived experience and my own lived experience, 3 memories of wartime and 1 of daily remembrance in peacetime. The 3 wartime memories are from my grandma, my mother and my father, and the peacetime memory is mine. My lovely Grandma Rose, may her sweet soul rest in peace, was my mum's mum. She was born in 1906 and died in 1987. Here's what she told me. In 1915, she was 9 years old. And one day, walking home from school in Limehouse with a friend, she heard the noise of an engine or motor above her in the sky, and she and her friend looked up. What they saw was a long balloon passing overhead, and they could see men leaning over the side of the balloon's basket, throwing things down. They then heard the sound of explosions somewhere not very far off. Since her friend lived closest to where they got to in their homeward journey, the girls ran back to her friend's house, where my grandma was treated to a slap-up tea. This is the thing she remembered, even though she'd just witnessed one of the earliest Zeppelin raids on London. There's a coda to this story, because she told me that when she finally got home, she found her mother half crazed with worry, wondering where her daughter had got to in an air raid. She got the full repertoire of Yiddish curses from my great-grandmother, and I dare say a pachintochas, a slap on the bum. Fast forward some 25 years after my grandma's experience. A fateful summer of 1940. My father served in the Royal Air Force, and during that time was stationed at, of all places, the Science Museum in South Kensington, London, where he was a Morse code instructor to naval ratings, learning to be radio operators. Go figure. He told me how he and everyone else in London had been spectators at that key battle that was going on at the time above their heads, the Battle of Britain. How you could hear the scream of the aero engines even though they were 18,000 feet above the streets of London. And you could watch the dogfights and follow the contrails of the aircraft as they weaved about the sky in mortal combat. Where were you when you saw this? I asked him, and he just matter-of-factly replied, "Oh, it was almost a daily occurrence. I was probably just walking to the tram stop after my shift. You could hear the rattle of the machine guns." And he added almost as an afterthought, "They were brave, those boys." What a reminiscence. A bystander as a battle raged above you. It's hard to imagine. About 4 years after, in the summer of 1944, my mother, aged 20 and a petty officer writer, in other words a sergeant shorthand typist, in the Women's Royal Naval Service, who was stationed at Combined Operations underneath Whitehall. She took the minutes at the planning meeting for D-Day. And ordinarily, I'm going off script here, it's pretty amazing. I could write a whole talk about my mother's wartime memories, but this one always stuck out for me because, you know, a young person, shorthand takers don't usually bother to read specifically the conversation they're taking down. They just make sure their shorthand is right. But at some point she was asked to read back some notes, and at that point she realized what it was she was taking notes about. And she told me she felt very scared, and it concentrated her mind wonderfully. That's why it's called D-Day. Apparently they wanted to call it C-Day, but she got it wrong. Never mind. But the reminiscence I want to specifically talk about is one day she was at Paddington Station. This is in the summer of 1944. It was the rush hour. The station concourse was packed with commuters. And here's what she told me. There I was in the midst of the crowd when the air raid siren sounded. We all knew it meant a doodlebug, a flying bomb, had been spotted and was flying towards the station. Instead of rushing for shelter, everyone stood still, stock still. You could have heard a pin drop. Imagine that. All those hundreds of people and not a sound out of anyone. We heard the throb of the flying bomb's engine and if the noise stopped, it meant that the engine had stopped and the bomb was going to fall out of the sky on us. But it didn't stop, and the noise went on into the distance. Then, just as suddenly as things fell quiet, the hubbub of the crowded station started up again, and everyone went upon their journeys. On hearing this story, I wondered what it must have been like, a busy, crowded scene in suspended animation. Now, I hope you'll excuse me, but I related now what follows at the Schul's Act of Remembrance 2 years ago. And as I curated the various suggestions and contributions for all those involved in building the contents of that event, I started to wonder why it is just for one day a year that we honour the fallen with solemn commemoration. In 2018, the occasion was unique, as we had reached a commemorative milestone of 100 years since the armistice of 1918. And today's remembrance service is unique too, as it is the very first to be conducted by Zoom in our shul, in the midst of this world turned upside down. Of course, the 11th of November isn't just to honour the dead and wounded of one war. It does so for all the conflicts in our country that our country has been involved in ever since the First World War. So I want to share with you again a personal experience about some daily acts of remembrance that were once part of my working life. I'm a baby boomer, and the 39-45 war in Europe was finished 5 years almost to the day before I was born. And I tell you this because the events of the war touched my family as it touched many other families of members of our congregation. My father's 6 brothers, many cousins, and my mum's dad, my grandfather, served, as did both my parents, as you have heard. So there was something like 60 years of military service in my family. I wonder how much that had influenced my early career after university and some teaching, as I found myself wearing working clothes of blue-grey in the Royal Air Force. Life was simple. There was no panic at deciding what colour tie to wear in the morning, for every day I wore the same black tie, itself a symbol of mourning. And the hat band around my service dress cap too was black, lest we should forget the sacrifices made by airmen and airwomen in both war and peace. So it was in that other life, in 1978, I was posted to what had been one of the iconic RAF stations of the Second World War, RAF Biggin Hill in Kent, that famous Battle of Britain fighter station and sector headquarters of Fighter Command. When I was posted there, it was the home of the selection centre for officers and aircrew. I'd been through that selection process myself just 3 years earlier at Biggin Hill, and now I was back as station education officer. When it was my turn to be station duty officer for the day, first thing in the morning, come rain or shine, you would find me standing opposite the flagpole outside the guard room. At a blast of the duty sergeant's whistle, I'd salute as he raised the RAF ensign, whilst others stood still in brief suspended animation before a second shrill blast of the whistle released us all to carry on about our business. Then, as my duty required, I walked to the chapel, St. George's Chapel, a small, outwardly uninspiring 1950s red brick church which stood in the station grounds on the Westerham Road, just opposite the officers' mess. I'll never forget the sensation of unlocking the chapel door and the smell of the varnished pews, the prayer books and kneelers, and the heady silence which cast its strange, comforting spell as I switched on the lights. And at that, the inscriptions on the reredos behind the altar suddenly shone out, each name inscribed in gold upon it, familiar to me and my fellow junior officers through repetitions of this duty. And then there was another task completed each day by the turn takers like me at what I now think of as a holy duty, which was to unlock the glass case where the Book of Remembrance, handwritten and illuminated on parchment, lay splayed open, awaiting my gloved hand to turn to the next page, whereon were written the names of the aircrew from the Biggin Hill sector who had been killed on that day's date between 1939 and 45. In all, there were 454 names inscribed in that Book of Remembrance. No matter how impatient I was to get on with my day, I did this page turning with what I would now call mindfulness, always pausing to read the newly revealed names of the pilots, observers, gunners, the British, the Canadian, the American, the Polish, the Czech, the South Africans, the Rhodesians, the Australians, the New Zealanders, and the Indian aircrew. Christians, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, and those of no faith, may their memory be for a blessing, who had given their lives so that I could be there 33 years later, not to do this just once a year, but to take my turn to perform this small daily act of remembrance. It was the very least I could do. Thank you for listening. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much, Norman, for this very vivid, emotional and personal talk. That's why we should remember, because in every generation we have people who have been affected by wars all over the world and have traumas and stories to tell about losing their families or members of their families. We continue now with the song. It is a long way to Tipperary. was a long way to Tipperary indeed, and the beginning of the end of our remembrance service. We continue with Aleinu on page 520. 520. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, אשר שם חלקנו לייחד את שמו, וגורר עלינו להמליך מלכותו. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגופי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום וידעת היום ושבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחתינו. And so our hope, Almighty God, is that our peoples abandon their empty worship of human bigotry and cease the blasphemy of calling on your name to justify oppression and hatred. Speedily turn all hearts to you and soften our human arrogance, and make the lives of all people a source of honor to your glorious name. For your rule is meant to make all creation a reflection of your glory. ונאמר והיה אדוני המלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. Now we continue with the personal reflection from Ron Scott, another serviceman in our congregation, and Ron was the person to be in charge with remembrance.
Muted. She is.
Sorry, I've been muted. But despite of that, I still will continue talking. I know I should finish, but I will carry on. Just would like to introduce Ron Scott, another serviceman in our congregation. He will say a few words before we will do the full last post and then continue with the Kaddish. Ron was the person who in charge with the remembrance service before I came, and a few years after I've been in the post with Nottingham Liberal Synagogue. And it's most appropriate for you, Ron, to say a few words before the last post. Thank you.
Before I start on the last post, I want to thank Norman for his comments and to say the experience of opening the case and reading the names out each day took place for me every day for the first 3 years of my service. As for the last post, it's a ceremonial call. The army of the old days had to learn a lot of skills and had to break the day up. And soldiers and NCOs didn't have watches. So each part of the day was preceded by a bugle call. And these bugle calls had little sets of words with them, like cookhouse, come to the cookhouse door, boys. These carried on certainly up until the middle of the 50s. I woke every day to the Reveille and went to sleep till the lights out. There came the need for a more formal ritual call, which didn't do everything. And the last post is in fact recall of the soldiers' day in those periods. It starts with the Reveille, which woke him up, and it ends with lights out, which put him to sleep. And in between, it uses many of the bugle calls of the day, not all of them, but many of them. In the middle of it, you'll hear the cookhouse, which I mentioned just now. And as it winds down towards the end, it starts to enable you to know that the work is over, the day is done, duty is completed, and it is time to rest.
We just lost it, Mike.
זיכרונם לברכה. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברה חירותה וימליך מלכותה. בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהיה שמי רבה מברך לעלה מעלמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לאלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה. תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהיה שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל בני אדם, ואמרו אמן. May their souls rest in peace. And we will finish our service today with the song Eli Eli, written by Hannah Senesh. The most simple and the most important things to remember and to cherish in our lives. My God, that this will never end, the sand and the sea, the rush of the water, the lightning of heaven, the prayer of men. Eli, Eli, שלא ייגמר לעולם, החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם, החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. Hannah was tortured after she was parachuted into Hungary and captured by the Gestapo. And the legend goes that the words of this song, of this poem, were on the walls of her cellar. And she was murdered, and her memory lives along through her poems. So please join me again to sing it together in Hannah's and all the soldiers' memory. Eli, Eli, שלא ייגמר לעולם, החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם, החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You can unmute yourself and we continue with the Kiddush.
Can I just say, before everybody unmutes, I would just like to say something, because it's a very special memorial service, and I'd like to thank everybody who took part in it and who contributed. And what I especially liked about it was the stories from the different generations, the stories that Rabbi Tanya told about the Lippmann family, going right back to the great-grandfather, and the same with the Randalls and Norman Randall, what a moving story about all your generations of the Randall family. And how nice it is to see in the congregation the three generations of the Silk family. I think it's really good to see them all here. And what a joy it was to hear and to see Ron Scott. So I just want to mention that.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you for your kind words, and thank you so much everyone who took part in this service and made it so personal and special. זכור את יום השבת לקדשו. אמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, בששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. על כן ברך אדוני את יום השבת ויקדשהו. ברוך אתה אדוני
אלוהינו מלך העולם.
בורא פרי הגפן. אמן. לחיים.
לחיים.
המוצאים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם. המוציא לחם מן הארץ.